Okay, another Klosterman book. I read But What If We're Wrong by Chuck Klosterman in 2021. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I wrote this about it. I like Klosterman a lot, even before I learned he was from up north like me. His path to understanding always seems to intersect with my own preference to make metaphors of the pop culture that matters to me. This book had me scared a bit at first that we weren't going to do that. It feels very clinical early on, but it picks up steam when he begins to focus on some specific topics and dig into those great metaphors that unfortunately won't resonate with everyone. I chose this book because ultimately I want to be as open-minded as much as possible when considering anything. One of the things that frustrates me so much about the world today is the polarization and fighting over the need to be right about everything. My biggest takeaway from this book is an admiration for his process in considering so many sides to the different ideas he tests. We assume we know so much. We assume so much is true. Reality is what we make of those assumptions. It's not such an objective thing. Klosterman understands this, and his winding path of exploring so many different perceptions is interesting and will cause you to think. And that's probably the highest praise I can give to nonfiction. This book caused me to think. Kudos to Chuck for addressing some of my favorite scientific failures by accounting for the assumed knowledge of dinosaurs, the universe, and even though he didn't want to, suggesting alternative ways to think about climate change. My favorite part of the book really came when he drilled down the evolutions of the American political system and challenged views about its partisanship. But What If We're Wrong asks you to keep considering things that others have let go and reminds us all that life won't always be like this. The book is so interesting. It is pretty tough at the beginning. It's dense in the way that most Chuck Klosterman is not, because it really talks about sort of his process and history and science. It talks a lot about music, for example, and how we figure out what music is going to be resonant hundreds of years from now and what we see as resonant hundreds of years ago. To say that Elvis is going to be king of rock and roll 300 years from now and not Taylor Swift, for example, is something that we just can't know. Another good example of this is Van Gogh, who really struggled to have any sort of popularity when he was alive. And now he's the subject of so much adoration and legendary art appreciation. The scientific things that he addresses here were so awesome for me. I love that he talked about dinosaurs. And I am not a person who disbelieves in dinosaurs altogether, but I get extremely frustrated about the fact that dinosaur science is constantly evolving. One of the things that really frustrates me about dinosaurs is that some of the beloved dinosaurs that I grew up with, like the Brontosaurus, they don't exist anymore, or we've debunked that those were actually dinosaurs. From what I've read, the Brontosaurus was a hybrid dinosaur that was put together with bones of other dinosaurs. And we have a brachiosaur now, and we have a pteranodon. These are the ones that have kind of taken the place of these dinosaurs that I grew up with being taught about. And that's the way that science works, right? We evolve as we learn more. One of the things that's really frustrating to me about dinosaurs is there's so many exhibits and so many shows. My kids watched Dinosaur Train. Of course, the dinosaurs have colors and they have sounds and they have personalities and all these things, and no possible way that we can know how a dinosaur sounds. We can guess and we have ideas, but it's before recorded history. So that kind of stuff is really a struggle for me. I like that he addressed climate change, even though he didn't want to. I understand that it's a politically charged topic, but the science topic that I compare it to a lot in the "but what if we're wrong" vein is how we think about earthquakes. Because so often we will read news reports or things about earthquake that say that we're due for the big one because of something that we believe to have happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it's tough for us to imagine patterns of things that happened before recorded history. We can put them into scientific ideas and we can say that maybe this is what happened and maybe this is going to happen again. But the concept of the big earthquake going to happen sometime in the next 100 years is based on a hypothesis. It's something that we're testing. It's not something that we are for sure right about. Lots of things, especially here on the West Coast and in the Pacific Northwest, have been published to make people extremely frightened of the possibility of when the big one comes. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with being prepared, but I do find it potentially terrible to live in fear of something that is completely out of our control and that we definitely don't know if it's right or wrong. So this concept, this challenging, this saying, but what if we're wrong, is something that I'm trying to do with everything. And I know not everybody does that. So many folks are concerned with being right, with being certain. What I'm trying to get comfortable with is uncertainty and understanding that I am uncertain about many things, and it's okay to be uncertain, and it's okay to live in that uncertainty. I really like this book to test presuppositions about the things that you might feel certain about that maybe you should challenge and think about, but what if we're wrong? I have my opinions about who are the greatest artists of all time, but I have no idea if they are going to be resonant to people hundreds of years after we're gone. So this book gives a way to look at that. It says, this is my favorite. This is what I like the best. This is what is the best. But what if we're wrong? What are some other things to consider? And I really like that. So this will go into my Chuck Klosterman playlist. I'm a huge fan of Klosterman, and this book was a really interesting way to do something different with Klosterman in a philosophical way. It was But What If We're Wrong by Chuck Klosterman. I read it in 2021, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Till next.